and welcome to Pitboards and Podiums with me, Maya Westwick. In today's episode, I'm going to be recapping the 2024 Australian Grand Prix, so buckle up and let's talk F1. Alright guys, so as I said, today is the Australian Grand Prix race weekend recap, so I'm going to get right into it. I'm not going to go into details from the practice sessions, but I am going to tell you who topped them and if anything dramatic kind of happened in them, and then I'll move on to qualifying and the race. I think it's safe to say that this weekend was relatively dramatic and action-packed, so I'm going to fit as much in as I possibly can. First of all, practice 1 was topped by Lando Norris. Also in practice 1, Albon had quite a severe crash that completely damaged his chassis and rendered it unusable, and it became public knowledge that Williams do not have a spare chassis at the moment. So when they damage one chassis beyond repair, that means they can only race one car that weekend. And controversially, they chose to give Logan Sargent's car to Alex Albon for the rest of the race weekend for the best chance of them scoring points. Now, that generated a lot of conversation online because, of course, it's not Logan's fault that they've only got one car. It's not Logan's fault that Alex crashed. It's nothing to do with him. And yeah, it kind of felt like he was the one being penalised. I understand from a points point of view and a Constructors' Championship point of view, but spoiler alert, Alex was not able to score any points anyway. So basically they've created this situation where it's bad for Logan and a bit of a kick in the teeth for Logan, but then it's also bad for Alex as well because it puts this pressure on him, and if he isn't able to deliver, then that makes him look bad. And then he wasn't able to deliver points. So, bit of a sticky one to start the weekend with. FP2 was topped by Charles Leclerc, as was FP3. Now onto qualifying. Q1 was topped by Carlos Sainz with a time of 1 minute 16.731 seconds. Perez got a 3-place grid penalty after the session for impeding Hülkenberg during Q1. George Russell was complaining about his brakes and said that his front brakes just don't really feel like they're working at all. Gasly and Ocon just absolutely were having a stinker. I mean, they have pretty much the whole season so far, but they really were not. They were not performing very well, bless them. They were not having a good time. And Gasly also was investigated after qualifying for crossing the line at the pit exit and received his first reprimand of the season for that. Albon, Magnussen, Zhou, Perez, Ocon and Russell all exceeded the maximum lap time of 1 minute 33 seconds between safety car line 2 and safety car line 1, but did not receive penalties for that because they were all deemed to be taking appropriate actions to not impede another driver, which is why they'd slowed down. And the 4 drivers out in Q1, because obviously there were only 19 cars competing, were Hülkenberg in P16, Gasly P17, Ricciardo P18 at home, not good for him, and Zhou P19. Hülkenberg was 0.267 seconds to Magnussen's time and in P15, so he was 0.2 of a second off getting through into Q2. So arguably, with how close the cars have been in qualifying, it's not like he only just missed out and didn't manage to scrape through. Gasly was 0.273 seconds from the cutoff. Ricciardo was 0.376 because he had his lap time deleted at turn 5 that would have got him out of Q1, and that is the first time that he's ever been out during Q1 at home in Australia. And Zhou was 0.479 seconds from the cutoff. But he was driving with front wing damage, which of course means there would be a huge loss of downforce for him. Q2 was topped by Carlos Sainz with the time of 1 minute 16.189 seconds. Nothing too dramatic really happened. So the 5 drivers out in Q2 were Sir Lewis Hamilton, which is probably the most dramatic thing from Q2, Alex Albon, Bottas, Magnussen and Ocon. So we've got Hamilton in P11 for the race start. Hamilton was 0.059 seconds from getting through to Q3, so he did just miss out. Albon was 0.266 seconds behind, Bottas at 0.439 seconds behind, Magnussen 0.526, and Ocon 0.796 seconds off the cutoff. Q3 was topped by Max Verstappen, who set a pole time of 1 minute 15.915 seconds, which of course is the first time that he'd topped any session so far this weekend. So that was his 35th career pole. And then we had Carlos Sainz completing the front row in P2 at 0.270 seconds behind Verstappen. Perez qualified in P3, but of course had a 3-place grid penalty, so dropped down to start the race from P6, which promoted Lando Norris up to starting P3. 0.4 seconds behind Verstappen, Leclerc starting P4, 0.5 seconds behind Verstappen, and Piastri starting P5, 0.657 seconds behind Verstappen. Then, of course, Perez P6, Russell P7, 0.8 seconds behind, Tsunoda P8, 0.873 seconds behind, Stroll P9, 1.157 seconds behind, and Alonso P10, 1.637 seconds behind. And now I mentioned, of course, that Zhou competed in qualifying with a broken front wing. Turns out that Williams were not the only team missing things, although of course they were missing an entire car, but Sauber did not have a spare front wing to the same specification as the one that Zhou was running on his car that was damaged, so he had to start from the pit lane due to replacing the broken wing and having to take the penalty for doing so because they couldn't just replace it like for like. At the race start, Hamilton, Ricciardo and Zhou all started on soft tyres in an attempt to make up positions right from the off. Alonso and Hülkenberg on hards, so they're attempting to play the long game and then overcut people later on in the race, and everybody else was on the mediums. On lap 1, Verstappen leads into turn 1. Everyone gets through the first corner with no incident, which for Australia was an achievement. And Russell, Stroll, Hamilton, Bottas and Magnussen all gain 1 position each. On lap 2, which of course with the new regulations is when DRS was enabled, Sainz took the lead using DRS. On lap 3, Verstappen complains that he lost the car and it was really weird, and then he says that the car is loose. And then by lap 4, Verstappen has smoke piling out the back of his car. His rear right tyre is on fire, he's falling down the race order and crawling back to the pits. He says on his team radio, "I have smoke, fire, fire, my brake." He gets back to the pits and is literally on fire outside the garage being extinguished. And this retirement ends a 43 race finishing streak and kills his hope of winning another 10th consecutive race, which of course he did last year, and if he'd won this race it would have been another 10 consecutive races. So he would have held that record twice by himself. He only completed 3 laps before he had to retire the car, and this was his first retirement since Australia in 2022. On lap 6, Ricciardo goes into the pits off of the soft tyres. He has a 2.8 second stop and goes onto the hards, coming out in P18. So his potential strategy of getting ahead of people with these soft tyres at the race start did not pay off for him. On lap 8, Albon pits coming out in P16, Hamilton pits coming out in P14, also on the hards, Magnussen pits also on the hards coming out in P15. On lap 9, Russell pits coming out in P11 on the hards, so even the medium tyres are not holding on at this point. Stroll pits onto the hards coming out in P12. Bottas had another poor stop from Sauber. Sauber have really been struggling this year with their pit stops. They know that they've got problems with their wheel nuts cross-threading, which if you remember Monaco 2021 with Mercedes, that's what happened to Valtteri Bottas, which is why he holds the record for the longest pit stop, because it took about 2 days to get the wheel off. So it's the same sort of problem. So they know that they've got a problem with that and that they need to be taking spare wheel nuts with them. They thought that they'd be able to kind of get it to about 5 seconds, which of course is not optimal, but it's not ridiculously long, but they were not able to. It was ridiculously long yet again. On lap 10, Leclerc pits coming out in P7 on the hard tyres, Piastri coming out in P8 on the hard tyres, Tsunoda coming out in P12 on the hard tyres, and Ocon coming out in P13 on the hard tyres. And then as we're going from lap 11 into lap 12, so the end of lap 11 into the start of lap 12, Leclerc passes Gasly, which is worth noting that Gasly is actually running in the points for the first time all season. It's the first time that an Alpine has run in the points at all season. Piastri then passes Gasly as well, so Leclerc's up to P6, Piastri's up to P7. Leclerc then passes Hülkenberg for P5 at the same time as Piastri's passing Gasly for P7, and then Piastri passes Hülkenberg for P6. So in very quick succession, Leclerc and Piastri both make up 2 places, effectively. On lap 15, Lando Norris pits, coming out in P5 on the hard tyres with a 2.6 second stop. So that meant that Leclerc and Piastri had actually undercut him. So by this point, Leclerc was back up to P3 and Piastri P4. This was intentional from McLaren for Lando to have been pitted afterwards to give him the advantage of having 5 lap fresher tyres to be able to chase people. However, of course, it did mean that it looked at first like the strategy was favouring Piastri despite Norris being ahead. Also on lap 15, Perez pitted onto the hard tyres coming out in P10 into the path of Lewis Hamilton. Hamilton tries to get past him. He has a slipstream going towards turn 3, but he just can't quite get past, and comments on his team radio about how fast the car is. On lap 16, Sainz pits coming out in P2 on the hard tyres, and Hamilton has an engine failure, retiring from the race by pulling over in sector 3, which of course brings out a yellow flag. At the end of lap 16, Ocon pits onto the hard tyres, which is his second stop of the race, by the way, and he comes out in P16. He had a very smoky right rear tyre / brakes during the pit stop, but that wasn't really a problem for him. And then after he's pitted, the virtual safety car is announced, which Alonso, Hülkenberg and Gasly all take advantage of. So Alonso pits coming out in P5 on medium tyres, Hülkenberg in P12 on medium tyres, and Gasly in P15 on hard tyres. By lap 18, we're in green flag conditions again and they can go racing again. On lap 21, Perez passes Russell for P6. On lap 24, the two Haas drivers swap positions, so Hülkenberg is P11 and Magnussen is P12. On lap 26, Hülkenberg has started chasing Albon down on 11 lap younger tyres. On lap 27, we see that Sainz, Leclerc, Piastri and Norris have really pulled away from the field, so that's the front 4 runners of the race. Alonso is in P5, 11 seconds behind Norris, with Perez close behind him. On lap 28, Perez passes Alonso for P5. Albon pits coming out on hards in P15, and Norris is within DRS to Piastri. On lap 29, Piastri is told to let Norris through for P3 because, of course, Piastri did unintentionally undercut him earlier on in the race. And Norris, they believe, has the better chance of making some sort of impact on Ferrari. On lap 30, Norris is told to get up behind Leclerc, and Ricciardo pits onto the hard tyres coming out in P17. Worth noting, of course, P17 at this point is last place because there was only 19 cars starting the race and 2 of them are out. On lap 32, Perez is still 11 seconds behind with Alonso in his DRS. So getting past Alonso into the clean air has not helped him at all. He's not made up any time to the front 4 runners and he's not really been able to make any impact in terms of catching them and getting past them. On lap 34, Leclerc says that his front left tyre is gone and Magnussen pits, coming out in P14 on the hard tyres. On lap 35, Leclerc pits, it has a 2.1 second stop, very nice, and comes out on the hard tyres in P4, very, very close, but still ahead of Perez. On lap 26, Perez then pits, coming out in P9 on the hard tyres. Hülkenberg pits, coming out in P11 on the hard tyres, and Zhou pits, coming out in P17, after another problem slow stop for Sauber, coming out on the hard tyres, so now Zhou is in last place. On lap 37, Tsunoda pits coming out in P10 on the hards. Albon is chasing Hülkenberg and comments on his team radio that Hülkenberg is driving dangerously by moving under braking. Bottas pits and has a 3.8 second stop, which is much better, coming out in P16 on the hards, but a spare wheel nut that they're having to take with them out into the pit lane did go loose in the pit lane and rolled away. They retrieved it straight away, but because of that, Sauber as a team were summoned to the stewards post-race and received a €5,000 fine for that. On lap 38, Stroll pits coming out in P9 on the hards. On lap 40, Piastri pits coming out in P5 on the hards with a 3.5 second stop. On lap 41, Norris pits having a 2.6 second stop coming out in P3 on the hard tyres. On lap 42, Sainz pits coming out in P1 still on the hard tyres. Piastri passes Alonso for P4. Alonso then pits coming out in P7. Gasly pits coming out in P15, and Mercedes consider Russell trying to make it to the end on just a one-stop strategy, which of course for Australia would have been a bit of a struggle. On lap 43, Ocon pits coming out in P17 or last place on the hard tyres. On lap 45, Magnussen passes Albon for P11. On lap 46, Russell pits, so they decided to go against this potential one-stop strategy. He comes out on the hard tyres in P7. On lap 49, Gasly receives a 5-second time penalty for crossing the pit lane exit line, which of course he received a reprimand for in qualifying the day before. On lap 58, Russell is chasing Alonso down, 0.5 seconds behind, desperately trying to get up to P6. And then on lap 58, Russell has quite a scary accident. So obviously, he was quite close behind Alonso, chasing him down. Alonso effectively tried to be clever, tried to do a bit of racecraft, and he tried to change the way that he had been driving into a corner to be able to get a better exit from that corner and then get away from Russell and prevent Russell overtaking him on this final lap of the race, because Russell was right on his gearbox. However, that meant that he misjudged it, and effectively appeared to brake test George Russell, and it meant that the gap between himself and Russell closed very dramatically, very quickly, completely unsettled George's car because, of course, the way that aerodynamics work in Formula One, there was no way of him anticipating that he would be that close behind Alonso that quickly in a braking zone. And it meant that Russell lost control of the car. He goes into the wall and then bounces back across the track and actually ends up with the car. If this is the car, like, if this is the track and this is the car, George was like this. If you're watching me, you'll see what I've just done. If you're not, he was on his side, basically. The tyres, obviously the way that they're designed in Formula One, the tyres are attached with tethers to prevent them bouncing off down the track and injuring somebody and potentially causing more accidents. But because of these tethers, the tyres had disconnected from the car and were only held on by these tethers, and they managed to go underneath the car and they were propping the car up on its side. So George was basically perpendicular to the track. Like, he was at 90 degrees. And that was in the middle of the track. He was not on his side, which is scary enough, in the runoff. He was not on his side in the wall. He was on his side in the middle of the track, and he couldn't even see what was coming because the way he was facing was across the track, but the bit of the car that was facing the direction that the cars were coming from was the floor of the car. So the bit where George's head is where there's the direction that the cars are going to be going in. So he can't even see what's coming and know that something's coming for him. So he's on his team radio begging for a red flag because he's literally on his side in the middle of the track. And because it was the last lap of the race, they did not red flag it because obviously everybody was going to have to drive past him anyway. They just virtual safety car'd it to reduce everyone's speed. That must have been terrifying for him. Like, some of the accidents that we've had in Formula One, if someone had hit him, that genuinely could have been it. Like, that could have been it for him, which is terrifying. And it could have been it for whoever hit him as well. It really, really could have done. Very scary. Very, very scary. And that, of course, generated a lot of conversation because there was a lot of controversy, perhaps, over whether that was the right decision to not red flag the race. On the world feed that we saw, like on Sky Sports and things like that, we didn't actually hear George Russell begging for a red flag. We just heard him say that he was okay. But on the driver on board, where you can hear the full team radio, you can literally hear him begging for a red flag, and he sounds terrified. And then some people online had the cheek to be like, he only wants a red flag so that he still gets points. I think his main concern was probably his life, to be quite honest with you. I don't think in that moment he's thinking about the 6 points he's going to get for P7. I think he's more thinking about not dying. But here we are. So the finishing order for the race, Carlos Sainz won, which was his third career win. And also, if you think about it, means that he is literally the only driver other than a Red Bull driver to win in the last 2 years. Which is crazy. Absolutely crazy. He also won Driver of the Day. He got 38% of the vote, and his race time was 1 hour, 20 minutes and 26.843 seconds. Leclerc was in P2. He got the fastest lap of the race on lap 56, which was a 1 minute 19.813 second lap. He finished 2.366 seconds behind Sainz. Norris completed the podium in P3, 5.9 seconds behind Sainz. We then had Piastri in P4, 35 seconds behind. Perez P5, 56 seconds behind. Stroll P6, 93 seconds behind. Tsunoda P7, 95 seconds behind. Alonso P8, 100 seconds behind. I will come on to this. Hülkenberg P9, 104 seconds behind. And Magnussen P10, a lap down. And then Albon, Ricciardo, Gasly, Bottas, Zhou and Ocon all a lap down as well. So that's 11th to 16th. And then Russell DNF'd on the last lap, Hamilton DNF'd on lap 15, Verstappen DNF'd on lap 4. So post-race, after this accident with George Russell, because no contact was actually made between himself and Alonso, There was a bit of a discussion over whether people thought that Alonso was going to be punished for that, whether they thought he should be punished for that, etc, etc. And Alonso was summoned to the stewards for this accident. He received a 20-second penalty added to his race time, and that was of course because it was the last lap of the race. They couldn't have given him a penalty to make him go through the pits because they weren't going through the pits again, so they just added 20 seconds to his race time. And basically the stewards deemed that Alonso was at fault and Alonso was the cause for that accident, which is why he got that penalty and why he then was dropped down to P8 rather than finishing in P6, I think it was. And lastly, a couple of other points from the weekend. It seems that Daniel Ricciardo has been given an ultimatum. Now, this may feel like I'm repeating myself from last year, but I'm not talking about Nick de Vries. But yes, once again, the Red Bull Junior team are giving one of their drivers an ultimatum. And supposedly Daniel Ricciardo has been given to the end of the Chinese Grand Prix, which is, of course, not the next race in Japan, but the race after that. He's been given until then to show that he deserves his seat. If he does not improve his performances, he will be out, and they will have Liam Lawson replacing him as the full-time RB driver alongside Yuki Tsunoda. Liam Lawson is now also the favourite to go to Red Bull next year when they inevitably get rid of Sergio Perez. So things have spiced up a little bit there. They really have. And bearing in mind Daniel Ricciardo very publicly supporting Christian Horner in what seems like a massive amount of arse licking to try and get the Red Bull seat next year, seems that potentially isn't going to have worked anyway. So he's basically shown himself to be a little bit of a misogynist, pushed away quite a large amount of his female fan base, and got nothing for it. Sucks to suck, doesn't it? Here we are. So I just want to talk, I've got some silly season predictions now based on all of this. So I think that Verstappen very much will go to Mercedes, and I thought this, I had an inkling of it for a while. Obviously, I've already spoken about it, but I very much think it. And I also think that there's been something come out, because obviously I'm filming this after the fact. I've been so busy with work that I've not had time to do this straight after the Australian Grand Prix. I don't know if the source is genuine or not, but I've seen people online talking about supposedly Verstappen has the offer of having an ambassadorial role for Mercedes, which if he does, considering that was what Lewis asked for, after Lewis has literally given so much to that team, and he was told no, that is a massive amount of disrespect, but it very much would seal him wanting to go there. So I think we are getting Verstappen to Mercedes. I think we're going to end up with maybe Sainz and Lawson driving for Red Bull, because of course Carlos Sainz is showing himself to be a very good driver. As I said, he is the only driver that's not a Red Bull driver to have won anything in God knows how many races, and he currently doesn't have a seat for next year. I think Perez is going to retire. I've said this before. I really do think he's going to retire, and I think Daniel Ricciardo is going to be forced to retire because the man is washed. There's no two ways about it. Back in the day, he was a good driver. Now, I don't know where that's gone, but we're not seeing it, are we? And everyone blamed McLaren. But here we are. So, it is what it is. It's Formula One. It's a brutal sport, unfortunately. So, yeah. If you have enjoyed this episode, please do let me know. Like, rate, comment, subscribe, share the podcast. I would really, really appreciate it. And I will see you very, very soon. I'm uploading both this episode and the Japan track guide today, because I know I am so behind on uploading this. So both of those will be uploaded today. And I will see you very, very soon with another episode. Thank you very much again. Bye!